The now ex-Atlanta police officer Garrett Rolfe and his fellow officer Devin Brosnan are facing charges over the shooting and killing of Rayshard Brooks following an altercation in a Wendy's parking lot in Atlanta. Joining us with the breakdown of the charges is criminal defense attorney and KUSI contributor Vic Bajaj. Vic, how you doing this morning?
Excellent. Good morning to you.
All right. Fair to say that the book was thrown at these police officers, including a felony murder charge. Your reaction to that is?
Well, you would have arguments on both sides, but as a criminal defense attorney and a trial litigator who has actually tried these exact types of cases in front of juries, looking at the white of their eyes, I think this is an extraordinary overstretch and an academic interpretation of the law. So the answer to your question, if you're asking me personally, Paul, would be yes. I believe they threw the book, and that may come back and bite them in the butt at the end of the day.
Explain why, Vic.
Well, the worst thing you can do as a prosecutor is exercise an extraordinary amount of prosecutorial discretion and overcharge a case. The reason why this is such a powerful issue is when you have charges of this magnitude, one can predict that the jury will be there to establish truth or falsifications or guilt or innocence at the end of the day. That means that there's very little room for plea bargaining to avoid a jury trial. I can tell you, after interviewing hundreds of jurors that have sat during trials in my career, they do not like it when charges are overblown or overdrawn. That weakens the remainder of the charges and hurts the prosecution's case if the jury sees it that way.
Vic, we had Sheriff Bill Gore on, I believe, Monday, and I asked him, this is the incident where the police were in pursuit and shot Mr. Brooks while he was firing a taser at them. We'll show the video again in just a bit. But Sheriff Gore had something surprising to say when I asked him if the officers did the right thing. Take a listen.
I think that's the answer in that case. You don't always have to respond to something. Sometimes de-escalating means walking away from a situation. In the case we saw there, we saw the gentleman running away with the officer's taser. We consider that in law enforcement a less lethal use of force. So it's not a deadly weapon, and to respond with a deadly weapon like a gun, certainly from what I saw on TV, appears to be inappropriate.
So, Vic, my question to you is it going to come down to whether or not a taser is considered a lethal weapon? Because if it is, Atlanta has a problem, because did they not also charge a couple officers a little while back for using a taser on some students, and it was described as a lethal weapon? What is a taser considered?
Well, that depends on who you're asking, and very astutely, Paul, you point out for our listeners and our viewers that this very district attorney in Fulton County in Georgia had indicated on the record during another press conference that tasers are in fact lethal weapons. So if we concentrate on the jurisdiction and the powers that be in the area where this case will be heard, the district attorney himself has issued contradictory statements. Now, if you're asking me as a person with my finger on the pulse of courts throughout the country, I will tell you that it is a lethal weapon. We don't look at just the taser and what that can do if it strikes somebody in the face or the eyes or anywhere on the torso. It can, and there have been recorded statistics showing over 1,000 fatalities caused by the singular use of tasers since 2004. So I would respectfully disagree with our sheriff in this county in that regard. I think it is fatal, it is lethal, and let's also carry on what we normally consider to be common sense. When a suspect who has shown extraordinary violence and a lack of obedience to reasonable and polite commands by an officer, and that individual then has a taser and shoots an officer, what becomes of the sidearm, the firearm from that officer? Will that violent criminal who has now fled and assaulted two officers use that firearm to finish the deal? So we can't just look at it in an academic way and consider this to be a law school exam. We have to look at it for the next practical steps, which is potential fatal use of the officer's firearm.
Well, you bring up the DA. I believe his name is Paul Howard. He described the arrest this way. Take a listen. Okay.
Mr. Brooks, on the night of this incident, was calm, he was cordial, and really displayed a cooperative nature. Secondly, even though Mr. Brooks was slightly impaired, his demeanor during this incident was almost jovial. Also, we noted that he received many instructions from the Atlanta officers, and he was asked many questions. Some of the questions he was asked repeatedly, but for 41 minutes and 17 seconds, he followed every instruction. He answered the questions.
So, Vic, listening to that, how do you respond to the DA?
Jovial, almost jovial, to an individual whose record was known to the officers after having run Mr. Brooks's record and understanding that he had done significant time for a violent crime against children. Jovial, I wouldn't describe it that way. And even as a defense attorney, we have to stick to the facts. And the facts here are that this individual, Mr. Brooks, God rest his soul, was doing his best to be jovial only insofar as trying to talk his way out of a DUI arrest.
So let me interrupt you, Vic. Will that press statement come back to haunt the DA's case?
It will not be entered in any part of the case in chief. As a matter of fact, the American Bar Association says, well, you know what, you shouldn't have these press conferences and try your cases in front of the public that may sit on the jury. So to answer your question, that's really speaking to the media and potential voters come election time, but it's not going to be part and parcel to the case in chief.
Vic, thank you for your time and your expertise. Obviously, all eyes will be on Atlanta in the coming months. We appreciate your time. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you so much. Thank you.